Okay. Are we on? Okay, I see it.
What? Okay, then we're good. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, well, thank you all for joining us tonight at Ford Latino's discussion tonight about what is happening in the nation. Clearly, this is a terrible day with what's happened at the U.S. Capitol. The morning started out, last night into the morning, started out with the election, the special election that occurred in Georgia, where two Democrats won the seats, the two senatorial seats there in Georgia, which was a very positive thing that happened down there. But here we have at the U.S. Capitol, where we have seen a mob basically take on members of Congress there at the Capitol. This brings up a lot of things that we need to discuss tonight as we go through all the day's events. And I want to really introduce here our national president, Del Marin with Ford Latino.
Good to be here with everyone this evening.
Yes. Our other board members, Patricio Provatina.
Hi, everyone.
Okay. Arturo Martinez, our other board member with Ford Latino. Fred Royal with the NAACP there in Wisconsin. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for asking.
Okay. So just to kind of go through things, I think we can start out first with the election that happened in Georgia, where we had candidates running for the two positions for the U.S. Senate, with the Democrats winning those positions, which now will change the dynamics of Congress in the Senate and basically give the Democrats in the Senate, in the House, and then of course in the White House, the ability to pass legislation which might have been difficult otherwise. So that was a pretty amazing event. But one of the key things though, leading from that, as the final vote counts were given on that in acknowledging the victory down there, we had this, what started out first in the morning, President Trump having an assembly of his supporters there on the grounds of the right below the White House, there on the Mall. And of course, he and his supporters were discussing about how they felt that they were cheated in the election. There is no evidence to show that there was anything that was done to prevent him from winning, other than he just did not get the support that he needed. From that event, he encouraged his supporters to move towards the U.S. Capitol to basically attempt to enter the Capitol, which they did, to pretty much bully and attack members of the Senate, which they did. And during this this movement of his supporters to the U.S. Capitol, a woman was killed, shot and killed. A bomb was planted, found, and disabled. And all these terrible things were done where offices were broken open. Nancy Pelosi's office, Trump supporters were there. Trump supporters were there in the main areas, the entry areas. And from what I understand, most have been removed now. But I want to go to some questions that I have for the group here. And I think, Patricio, since you're there in Washington, D.C., right there at ground zero, the question I'd like to ask you is, how could this have happened today at our nation's capital? Why didn't we have, law enforcement there able to prevent this from occurring at our nation's capital?
So, sorry about that. So let me, I guess, start out. I've been living in DC for about 10 years, so I know the city fairly well. I also used to work at the U.S. Capitol, so I'm very familiar with the layout of the grounds of the building itself. And I think one of the things that's hard for people to understand is that DC is not a state, and therefore the way law enforcement works here is very different than anywhere else in around the country. Because we are a federal entity, there are parts of the city that are controlled by the federal government, and there are parts of the city that are controlled by the mayor and by the local police. And so in this case, the U.S. Capitol itself is governed by the U.S. Capitol Police. And their number one job is to protect members of Congress and to protect staff who live there or who work there. So I think something that is yet to be determined is, what was the U.S. Capitol Police doing? They knew that this could happen, and it seems to me like none of them, they were not ready for it. They were not ready for this mob of people that was incentivized to move from the White House to the U.S. Capitol, which is more than a few blocks away. You can walk there, but it takes you about 25 minutes. So I'm not sure. I think this is a major failure on the U.S. Capitol Police's side. I will say, to me, there's also a great contrast with the Black Lives Matter protests that happened in the city. I happened to participate in a lot of those, and the city was completely militarized. Living here, there was sirens all the time. There were military helicopters flying overhead. It doesn't seem to me like any of that was deployed today until very late in the evening. The city has declared a curfew as of an hour ago. We are under curfew. They have asked nobody to be outside. You can be arrested by the police if you're outside. But this happened very, very late. And so I'm very confused as to, why there was not the levels of security necessary on the day that the election was going to be certified at the U.S. Capitol. So that's just a few things to give you some background.
Yeah, thank you, Patricio. Fred, I'd kind of like to pivot over to you and kind of get your perspective. As Patricio had indicated, things were done differently when the BLM movement and the protests happened this summer. And also we noticed that the Confederate flag was waving there at the steps of the Capitol. How do you see what happened today? How do you explain that?
So Patricio may be a little more politically correct than the statements I'm about to make. But we know that law enforcement endorsed Donald Trump to a large degree. We know that there is institutional racism within law enforcement, just by the amount of deaths that have occurred since George Floyd. We're saying post George Floyd, people walking home with Subway sandwiches in their hands or coming out of garages with iPhones in their hands, delivering Christmas packages. So when Donald Trump said to the Proud Boys, stand down and stand by, maybe he was talking to law enforcement officers, because there was definitely a contrast, a difference in how law enforcement reacted to Black Lives Matter's protest, a protest, which is in reaction to an event that folks feel is not correct. This was not a protest. This was an insurrection. This was an assault on our government. And the police, the National Guard, had no response. There were 25 law enforcement officers injured. One lady lost her life. Property damage to federal property. They disrupted a constitutional process in transferring peaceful power to a elected officer. So for them not to respond, not to even be armed when they showed up, shows that there's a stark difference in how these individuals were treated versus the individuals in Black Lives Matter. But what I will say positively is that it showed that law enforcement can de-escalate when they want to.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you very much. And I guess I will ask Daryl. Daryl, a number of national folks in the media have indicated that this was an attempted coup today, and that this was also a violation of the Smith Act, which was passed in 1940, making it a criminal offense to advocate the violent overthrow of the government. How do you see this? Do you agree with what is being said? If so, how do you see on whether the president will be able to maintain office till January 20th?
Well, thank you very much for that question, Joe. And let me say thank you very much for organizing this very important roundtable on such short notice given today's activities. Today has been most troublesome, as we've only seen not only an attack on our Capitol, but an attack on our Constitution and our democracy. And what's been most stunning, and let me preface this by saying that For Latino is a nonprofit, nonpartisan organization. So any comments I make here are going to be related with regards to policy and performance. But it can be said that I think the majority of the country is most disappointed in the actions of our current president. For over a month now, he's been calling on people to go to Washington, D.C. to disrupt this constitutional procedure that is mostly ceremonial, but required per the U.S. Constitution. This morning, during his address to the crowds, he was encouraging them to stay strong, not to give in, and then to go to the Capitol. Let me say that again. This morning, on TV and being streamed throughout the country, this president told everybody to stay strong, not give in, and then go to the Capitol and make themselves noticed, make themselves heard. So when we see that they breached the barrier, when we see them breaking windows to bypass security at the Capitol, when we see them breaking into offices of not just the members, but leadership, where there are national security secrets kept and documents, rifling through the cabinets, pulling out documents, posing for pictures. And in one instance, there was an armed standoff as they were trying to break in to the House chamber. And Capitol Police had their firearms drawn and pointed at the door. That is an image my sons and I will never be able to forget seeing play out here in the United States, in Washington, D.C., in the U.S. Capitol. There's no other way one can describe it but an insurrection. This was not a peaceful protest. There was no outlined goal there other than to disrupt a constitutional process. And after much, from what's being reported, much pressure, the president put out a half-measured response asking people to finally stand down. But prior to that, we saw Mike Pence, in no uncertain terms, demand people leave and tell them that they were going to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. We saw our president-elect, Joe Biden, act today as our president, calling for calm, for restoration and the protection of our democracy, and asking people to please stand down, go back and think about what they're doing and truly put America first. So today's been most troubling, as much of what has happened over the last few years. So to answer your question, yes, today was an insurrection. It was not a protest. And I will just add one last comment before we pass it on. A few months ago, we saw a peaceful protest where people of all colors and all religions came together in Lafayette Park to ask for reconsideration and reform in our nation's policing policy. They prayed, they spoke, they held vigil, only to have themselves surrounded by military personnel, be showered with tear gas, and brutally pushed to the side so this president could take a picture holding an upside-down Bible in front of a church he does not attend. Tell me, if they could marshal the resources on such short notice to do that, why did they not put the work in Why did they not organize and bring in the technology and the personnel they needed to protect our capital during something that the president's been calling for the last 30 days? So
Thank you, Darrell. Thank you very much. Art, I'd like to ask you a question about the Republican Party, but I'd like to get responses from everybody else after you, then Fred, Patricio, then Darrell. This morning on Fox televised the event that Trump and his family held there on the mall, the green area, just down the hill from the U.S. Capitol. Trump and his family, his sons, stated that the Republican Party is no longer the Republican Party. It is the party of Trump. So my question to you and to the others is, what should the Republican Party do now? Should they denounce Trump? Should they denounce the actions? What should be done?
Well, I think that the all of the senators, all of the legislators who had said that they were going to oppose the appointment now need to reconsider that. And I would think that they need to reconsider that and ask themselves, are we really a nation? Are we really Republicans? And if I, raise the issue that we should not count then that the election should be overturned, then they are, in a sense, putting themselves right in the same beliefs as Trump. And so I think then that, these Republicans and this who are planning on taking a position to oppose the electoral votes should really need to, they really need to reconsider that, because in a sense, if they don't, it puts them right along with Trump.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Fred. What do you think the Republican Party should be doing at this point?
So I don't think that I would condemn the entire Republican Party. I think that some individuals did stand up and put the country before party. I think that the individuals that had supported Trump's false accusations that this was a rigged election should be held accountable for the actions of insurrection that occurred today, because that's just what this was, nothing less than an attempted coup. I think they should be held accountable for their actions so this type of thing doesn't occur again. Slapping people on the wrist for jeopardizing the founding principles of this country, a peaceful transfer of power. That is the hallmark of democracy, in which this country has always stood on. And if you were going to jeopardize that, there should be some consequences. So people think long and hard before doing this nonsense again, making false allegations of rigged elections that forces a stain on what this country is built on, supposedly freedom and democracy. So I think that this is going to put a mirror up to those who call themselves Republicans and make them do a soul searching to see if they really are Republicans or if they believe in fascism and Donald Trump over the party.
Thank you. Patricio?
I think Fred put it very well. I think there's a faction of the Republican Party that still believes in the principles of democracy. However, I think that that's becoming very quickly a minority within the party. I think there is a large percentage of the party that has openly accepted authoritarianism. And what we're seeing today, to me, is the culmination of 4 years of Donald Trump and before him. Donald Trump is a symptom. He's not, he didn't just appear out of nowhere. The Republican Party has been attacking democracy for a long time. And I hate to be partisan when I say this, but it's hard not to. They have been attacking the press. They have been dog whistle politicking for many, many, many years and turning certain people into the enemies and saying, here's the enemy, don't pay attention to what we're doing. To me, this is all, classic authoritarian playbook tactics. This is what, if this were happening anywhere else in the world, everyone would be screaming, this is a coup. And so none of what has happened today to me is a surprise, as being someone that studies democracy, that studies how populist and authoritarian leaders behave around the world. Everything that happened today is the culmination of Donald Trump's presidency. He has been he has been challenging and questioning the rule of law. He has been undermining a legitimate election via his statements because he didn't win. And he has an entire group of people that don't believe in facts, that don't fit their narrative, and that he calls anybody that questions them fake news. All of this is your stereotypical authoritarian playbook. And there is a large percentage of the Republican Party that is to blame for all of this, because they have not been standing up to Donald Trump for the last 4 years. They have been quiet, and they have been enabling this. And so I think there has to be, there will have to be a very deep look into who allowed for all of this to happen, because this didn't just appear out of nowhere.
Thank you, Patricio. Daryl?
Boy, it's an excellent question, Joe, and I agree with much of what's been said here this evening. We've been seeing a battle be waged now since this president's first election by many Republicans, but to Patricia's point, it is a small minority of the Republican Party. When we look at what's happened and we look at the actions of the last 4 years, it's important that we remember that this president still garnered the largest number of votes ever by a sitting president. That's not in dispute here. That illustrates the amount of support that he currently has and the frustration that some have with the current system. So it would be nice to just simply be able to wave it away and say the issue is going to go away with Donald Trump. No, it won't, because there's been a fundamental shift behind a large portion of the US population. There will continue to be a battle. We saw groups who sprung up during the election, the Lincoln Project, Republicans Against Trump, and others, who invested hundreds of millions of dollars campaigning against him, et cetera. But once again, they do not make up the majority of the party anymore. So there is going to be a battle for the heart of the party. And I don't see it unifying. It may fracture, may separate into two parties, et cetera. But there is something to be said for the need to explore the anger and frustration on both sides. And there's definitely a lot of work to be done here, but obviously the way they're going about it is completely unacceptable. And I think many of those who decided to ride the president's coattails have taken democracy for granted. While Republicans have long prided themselves as defenders of the Constitution, it's very clearly they've taken it for granted and think they could get away with it and deal with the dog whistles, look the other ways, and the undemocratic policies, and that things would still survive. Yes, I'm confident the U.S. is going to continue. Our republic will survive, et cetera. But I think we now see how fragile democracy is and how easy it is for somebody with authoritarian leanings can gain the support of a good size portion of the population.
Thank you, Daryl. Thank you. This other question is a very important one. And Fred, I'm going to ask you this first, because this morning a lot of people woke up to the victories that occurred in Georgia in the 2 Senate races. So we have Warnock and then Ossoff. And then Warnock, actually was able to pretty much declare victory in the middle of the morning, early morning. But what does this mean for us in the country? Many working class people of color were applauding what happened down there. What does it mean to you?
Well, I think it's a victory in the sense of America as a whole. I think Joe Biden will be able to pass some type of national pandemic legislation, particularly some type of wearing of masks, the dissemination of vaccines, a more codified, unified approach of dealing with this pandemic. I think that the relief packages that were talked about and discussed will be a lot more, or should say a lot quicker to come to fruition because we have control of the Senate. There should be less obstruction and more collaboration on getting legislation passed to get this country back on an economic footing. Historically, for the state of Georgia to have 2 Democrats, 1 African American elected as a senator, I mean, it's historic in that sense, but this is 2021. We should be past the first African Americans elected or the first Latinos elected. We should have a democracy that's reflective of the community that we live in. So while I am glad to see it come to pass, we still have work to do.
Thank you, Fred. Daryl, what does Georgia mean to you? And then Patricio, too?
Well, it means to me that the American people and the people of Georgia got it right. That the majority, albeit a very small majority, saw through the claims that the false claims that this president was making. I want to give a nod to some Republicans that really played a key role here. There's Secretary of State and the governor in the elections who stood up to this president and said, no, our elections were fair and we provided access and they were counted accurately. As late as just yesterday, the president was in Georgia barnstorming once again, demanding, and we all saw it on the call as well, demanding that they recalculate was the word he used and find him the necessary 11,781 votes that he needed to win. So the people got it right, although it was by a very slim margin. So there is tremendous work to do. The president-elect has his work cut out for him in trying to bring a very polarized country together for the good of all.
Thank you, Daryl. Now for Patricio and Art, in regards to that question, what impact on policy will that mean with what happened in Georgia for the next administration?
So if I could add just briefly something to your prior question, I think the victory in Georgia is significant for several reasons, but I think the number one reason is that it demonstrates that when you invest in local organizing, you can win. You know, Stacey Abrams had the election stolen from under her, and instead of, you know, getting mad and complaining, and she organized, and she organized a group that has changed the politics of Georgia. If you look at what happened in Arizona, it's the same case. The Latino community organized and succeeded. So I think that the story of Georgia is if you empower people and if you organize at a grassroots level, democracy wins and democracy succeeds. So to me, you know, having beyond COVID, once we get through COVID, I would put as HR 1 a new Voting Rights Act that makes elections a holiday, that allows people to vote and be registered as soon as they turn 18 across the country, and that truly empowers everyone to participate in democracy.
Thank you, Patricio. Art?
Yeah, I agree with Patricio that it woke up a lot of people. It woke up a lot of people who, you know, were tired of being neglected, and they kind of felt that, you know, we need to work together, we need to build a strong coalition, and we can overcome this. And I think that is what they did. You know, they joined together, they built a strong coalition, they outbid the money that the Republicans were throwing in. And it was the joint collective venture of a group finally saying, we had enough and it's time that our voices be heard, got together, organized, and put out that vote and demonstrated to the nation that, yes, when they pull together as one unity, they can win. And that is what happened.
Thank you, Art. Next question goes to Daryl. Daryl, what does this mean, the incoming administration, for us in the Latino communities of color? What does it mean? What do you think is going to happen? Will our voices be lifted?
Well, I think there's no doubt that we're going to see some immediate changes once the president-elect and the vice president and the new Congress is put in place with these, particularly with these two new senators here. Over the last 4 years, we've seen people of color be villainized. If you're Latino, you are a member of a gang. We've heard over and over again, murders, rapists, and terrorists. And while the president would frequently say this was with regards to immigrants, the connotation was that it applied to all Hispanics, right? And that's why we've seen the level of hate crimes increase. Regardless, nobody stops somebody before committing a hate crime and says, what's your immigration status, right? So we've seen from immigrants to Latinos to the way he has encouraged or made statements that were inflammatory when there were valid, peaceful protests with regards to social justice, particularly in Black communities. Over and over again, he has stoked the flames of division and forced and jammed policies that Congress, by a slim majority, would still continue to support, just so they could garner his support. So we're going to see some catastrophic changes come through. Obviously, the president's job is going to be a lot easier now that they will have control of the Senate, although that doesn't mean everything's going to be a cakewalk. The filibuster is still in place, et cetera. I think we can begin to see a more, appointments be more balanced to the court. We've seen with the justices that have been appointed by and approved by the Senate during this president's administration, many of them didn't even meet the National Bar Association's minimum requirements as qualified to be a judge in the first place. I mean, and that just goes on and on and on. I think we'll see significant changes with regards to climate change, which has a huge impact on the health of communities of color, with regards to LGBTQ rights and equality, and the list will go on and on. Look forward to joining the Paris Accords and so much more. So we are going to see a significant shift. That being said, there's going to continue to be this undertone of division that's going to be stoked because this president's still going to have a voice with his base. So it is going to be a challenging time, but the people will prevail.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so final thoughts. I'm going to start with Fred and NAACP. Fred, what does this all mean to you from going forward?
Well, as the discussion opened, where we're talking about the difference in treatments from law enforcement with the Black Lives Matter movement to this treatment of these folks that committed an insurrection act against our government today, I think police accountability is number one on the list of my concerns that I hope gets addressed. We know that there are huge disparities in how communities of color are viewed by law enforcement. And this summarily execution of individuals just because they're driving, because they're walking in a neighborhood or jogging in a neighborhood has to stop. The police have demonstrated today that when they want to be restrained, they can restrain themselves. And they need to have that same type of attitude going forward. But then we also have to look at all the cultural sensitivity training that this administration has eliminated within the government that will be replaced. This talk of cancel culture, when you are someone who has stood to divide this country and wanted to succeed and you lost the war, that is not being proud of a heritage. That is like telling a Jewish person that it's okay to have a statue of Hitler erected. That's not culture canceling. That is setting history straight. So when we rename these military bases that are being honored for Confederate leaders, that's a start in the right direction to bring this country and heal this country.
Thank you, Fred. Art, and then Patricio, and then Daryl.
Well, I think that it really brings in awareness, that people not just in Georgia but people across the country can say, you know, if we pull together as one group, we can create a difference. I think that it also should be able to send a message to those individuals who haven't really recognized or have really, in a sense, said they believe in the culture of equity, but really don't practice it, that this really is gonna create some changes in their thinking. And if you're gonna say that you believe in equity, then show it by action. And I think that's kind of the direction that we're going to be heading.
Thank you, Art. Patricio? Oh, you're on mute.
I think Fred hinted at some of this, but I think moving forward, I'm hopeful because I see that there's an entire new generation of civil rights activists and social justice activists that are my age and a lot younger, who see the country in a very, very different way and are not going to accept and do not accept what has been happening for the last 4 years and before that. So I think there is hope ahead, but getting there will require having those hard conversations. When you look at other countries that have suffered through deep levels of polarization and traumatic events and have dark histories, they have truth commissions. They have conversations about what happened and why it happened, and they set the record straight. The U.S. is nowhere near that. We're just beginning to have those hard conversations about our history, about our past, about who we are as a nation and where we're going. But I have hope. I do think that there is a generation ready to pick up where prior generations left off, and I think what lies ahead will be good for this country.
Thank you, Patricio. Daryl?
Well, let me just add one more thing that I should have mentioned in my previous answer with regards to where I'm hopeful that we will see change before answering this last question. One, on the issue of gun reform. I've been a longtime sportsman, have hunted all my life, owned numerous firearms, etc. But even the majority of firearm owners believe there needs to be reform in the system so that individuals can't simply go online or go to a gun show and bypass all the protections that have been put in place to keep violent felons from purchasing those. So very hopeful that the Biden administration will take action on that. We'll be more than happy to partner with them on that, but that's something that impacts all communities, whether you're a person of color, whether you're in an abusive marriage, whether you suffer from depression, etc. The facts are the facts and they do not lie. Commenting or closing remarks on what happened today. I've heard some people, or I saw some people waving the "Don't Tread on Me" flags, talking about the next Boston Tea Party, etc. Let's remember what those were created for. The Boston Tea Party happened because there was a lack of representation, where there was a government that wasn't giving a voice to the people, wasn't asking for input. Hence the "Don't tread on me" quote. This is not what happened today. The people were represented. The people were granted the right to vote. The people's voices should be heard, and these were people who weren't in the majority, and for the purpose of not winning, decided to all but light fire to our Capitol and our Constitution. There's a lot of work cut out for all of us here, but together we can make this a better nation and really get back to focusing on making the principles that are embodied in our Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence a reality, not just for a certain class of individuals, but for everyone, as we're all blessed with God's grace. So thank you once again.
Okay, thank you, Daryl. Well, and thank you all. I hope that we have these regular discussions. I just want to kind of end this with one important statistic, according to the Economic Policy Institute that Daryl and I visited several years ago in DC. Based on their statistics, people of color will be a majority of the American working class by 2032. 2032. So we're on our way. The Black community played a key role, along with the Latino community, in these elections, this in 2020, and of course down in Georgia. So things are changing. We need to make sure that we're always at the table, and I want to thank you all. Thank you, Daryl. Thank you, Patricia. Thank you, Arturo. Thank you, Fred. This has been an amazing discussion. We need to have more of this because our voices are not always heard on a national level. Thank you, Forward Latino. Thank you.
Yeah.
Joe.
Okay. Are we signing off, Daryl?